From DataStax, this is the Distributed Data Show podcast.
Hello, everyone. I'm Aleks Volochnev, developer advocate at DataStax. And today we have a very special guest, Joshua McKenzie. And we have also a very interesting topic about that road to a Cassandra version 4. Hi, Joshua.
Hello.
Yeah, really glad to have you here today. And I'm going to introduce you to our guests. Joshua works for DataStax at DataStax for many years already. And last years, I know you were VP of engineering. Mm-hmm. But could you please introduce yourself first?
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, Josh McKenzie. I am an Apache Cassandra PMC member and committer, and I've been at DataStax for over 6 years, which is very anomalous for me. Being at a place for this long and not getting bored is a testament to the complexity of what it is we're working on. In terms of my experience with the project and kind of my role with it, ironically enough, a little bit over 6 years ago, I started as the Windows lead. And I didn't know that at the time that I was pulled into the project. That decision was apparently made between the time that I got the job and actually started, which is good that I happen to be pretty agnostic to those kind of things. So that proved to be a really interesting experience, an opportunity to kind of deep dive with some of the things going on in the Windows kernel and how it intersected with Cassandra. But yeah, over time that kind of evolved a little bit, worked on CDC, added a few different types to the system, done some work in the commit log space, and have also done quite a bit of project management and coordination on the project for the last like 4 years now at this point. So yeah, hands in a lot of, fingers in a lot of pies, and kind of stay active and stay busy, and really connected with a lot of people both inside and outside DataStax, mostly a first tribe with the project itself.
Okay. Could you please also explain for those who don't know yet, what's the PMC for Apache Cassandra?
Yeah, the PMC on an Apache project is the project management committee. It's essentially people that are responsible for cultivating the community and helping the project stay healthy, stay diverse, and make sure that things are moving along, and that the kind of Apache credo of community over code is upheld, and that essentially governance is healthy on the project.
Great. And is it a big team? I mean, PMC for Apache Cassandra?
Yeah, well, there's a difference between the body itself as a whole and the number of people that are actually active on it. So the PMC itself, I think, is about 33 people last time I checked. But in terms of the active individuals on there, we're probably low double digits in terms of those of us that are active on the project at this time. We don't do anything emeritus or inactive or anything like that. So PMC members from 10 years ago will occasionally pop up their head and have a point of view on something, and it's always fun to see people come back and re-engage. But yeah, it's a large body, and that's one of the things about the Apache process that is so unique, and for a lot of people it's kind of difficult to wrap their head around, is that notion of building a consensus with a large number of people. It's a thing that requires a different set of skills, a different set of perspectives, and honestly a different set of kind of political sensitivity or insensitivity sometimes to kind of have those discussions at large and come to conclusions.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy to collaborate with such a big team. I have a family of 3, and when we discuss where to go for a vacation, every time it's very painful. Yeah, so absolutely. I don't know how you guys manage that.
Yeah, and you also think about, like, software engineers are historically a pretty strong-willed lot. So when you got a group that large of a bunch of strong-willed people, it takes some time. But the theory is, and the belief is, that the conclusions we come to are better for it.
Yeah, I can understand. So, Josh, the main question, what's inside the Cassandra community and Cassandra users, goes for years already. Cassandra version 4, why it takes so long? What's happening inside?
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the point?
One of the things that we've found from talking to a lot of users in the community is that there's basically like one indicator of whether a project is moving or not, and that's major releases. And if you go into the Jira and actually take a look at what's happening on the project, we've had that same kind of cadence of contribution, of stabilization, of Jira tickets open and closed by count. What's been going on with 4.0 is really a major push towards stabilization, is really looking to, if you look at other database software, for instance, from like the relational database movement, it takes decades to stabilize software of this complexity and at this point in the infrastructure layer. So what 4.0 really is a major push towards more robust testing, more robust use case testing, generative fuzz testing, and really sussing out things that you wouldn't expect to run into, and 99 years out of 100. But with software that is as widely adopted as Cassandra is, and that's so ubiquitous, there's going to be somebody somewhere that has those chain of events that leads to those kind of situations. So looking at the scope of work in 4.0 proper, we're looking at it being, I think, anywhere from 30 to 40% more work than that went into 3.0 as a major, just by sheer ticket count alone. And a disproportionate number of those tickets are actually bug fixes and stabilization in the system.
Yeah, that's cool. I can imagine there is really a lot of work behind that. Well, when I was responsible for some site reliability, the golden rule of everything was never use version X.0. Always wait for X.1. Like always, never go with anything 0.0. Yeah. So I see. So you guys want to have 4.0 absolutely reliable.
Yeah, that is the aspirational goal, and I think that is actually a realistic goal. One of the things that's happening differently with this release is massive use case testing, where we're actually in the community, some of the individuals that are running some of the larger cluster counts are standing up clusters and actually replaying data through that cluster that they've captured in real time from the system itself. And in 4.0, there's a new tool. There's a binary audit logging system called FQL tool, which for the geeks among us, it's actually based on a Chronicle queue, which is, I think, out of the high frequency trading sector, super high speed queue implementation that basically lets you capture data live from your cluster without negatively impacting its performance. Turns out you can use that to replay it on the new code base versus the old code base. There's an open source Cassandra diff tool that lets you diff those things. So we literally have hundreds of use cases that have been tested against 4.0 before its release. And that's an entirely new motion and new muscle for us. And that's something that came from the community participation itself, which is really cool to see.
Yep, I know. I was at the Accelerate last year at the talk of Vinay Marchella of full query logging. And I was really excited. We got some talks about that later on. And it's a really cool thing. And first, it's very nice to see how big companies like Netflix invest so much time and efforts into the Apache Cassandra first, and second, that's a really cool tool for all the kind of replaying production logs and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. Speaking of testing, besides the full query logging, what also you are using to make the system stable? What are the main technologies behind?
Well, there's another thing that DataStax open sourced, I think about a month ago, called Fallout, which is an extension of Jepsen. It's basically Jepsen as a service. And for those that don't know, Jepsen is, I don't know what Kyle's last name is off the top of my head, but anyway, AFIR does this testing of distributed systems and their consensus algorithms and checks the different correctness and guarantees of them. And Fallout basically provides Jepsen as a service. And the whole notion behind this testing infrastructure is it has three logical components. One is you generate data that goes into the database. The second is you have what's called nemesis, which will take machines down, which will cause network partitions, which will cause degradation. And then the third thing you have is validators, which check to make sure that the data that you think should be there is actually there. And the reality is that in these distributed systems, when you have 60, 70, 80, 600, 1,000 nodes, on any given day, something's going to be going wrong. That's enough nodes out there that there are going to be suboptimal situations on your network with your infrastructure, what have you, and testing to ensure that when those things occur, you're actually in a good state is a very complex thing in a distributed system. Go figure, right? Like Chaos Monkey at scale. So Fallout is one of those kind of new tools and new approaches. And the Fallout that we open source is actually based on Kubernetes. So there's been a move with the project towards having, there's actually kind of a proliferation of Kubernetes operators right now. One from Orange, Instacluster has their point of view, DataStax has their point of view, and there's kind of a push towards unification of the operator. Fallout is based on Kubernetes in its open source form, And the version inside DataStax with Fallout is actually based on an internal tool, which kind of needed to be deprecated. So there's a lot of testing that happens, and those tests need to be rewritten on the open source project. But basically, there's that angle of generative fuzz testing, which I'm a big believer in. There's the angle of a massive number of use case tests, also a big believer in that as well. But the fundamental problem that we run into in computer science, and in this case, is that when you look at the combinatoric nature of some of these systems that you're attempting to test, and you matrix all the different configurations that you would need to test at what scale, you run into the heat death of the universe problem, where like testing all of them would end up taking more time and more computing power than the human race has and is expected to have. So we kind of have to figure out, like, there's one of the things you often see is in different domains, and this is related, is that you will have algorithms that generate this mass proliferation of things, and then the human needs to come in and actually tune and decide and add that kind of qualitative layer of judgment to what testing do we need to do. And so that's true of Fallout and of the matrix of tests that we're running as well. But anyway, yeah, there's a whole lot of different testing that's going on. That's the TLDR for 4.0 that we've never had before, that is really, really promising. And we've actually surfaced a huge number of kind of unknown things in the system that can happen when the stars align in just the wrong way, that we've been able to fix before people have actually run into it, which is huge.
Yeah, my favorite problem, current moon phase is not supported by your operating system. Okay, one more question. NoSQL Bench. Are we using NoSQL Bench for testing Cassandra version 4?
Yes, Fallout actually is integrated with NoSQL Bench, but NoSQL Bench is actually kind of a bigger, and this is actually an interesting question, load generation tools and what opinions they're expressing. NoSQL Bench is a broader point of view about testing NoSQL databases at large, whereas there's a ticket on the open source Jira right now. The work hasn't been open sourced quite yet, but there's a tool called Harry, which Aleks Volochnev has been working on, that has its own kind of load generation point of view. John Haddad's done a bunch of really, really great work with TLP stress from the last pickle that has kind of a different point of view about load generation. And much like the Kubernetes operator, where there's this question of, and Scott Andreas phrased this, I think, incredibly well, like, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Like, there's a lot of different points of view on load generation, and all of them are valid, right? All of them have different things they optimize for. And the same thing may hold true for Kubernetes operators as well. So we're kind of trying to figure out as a project, what is the right thing? Do we just say, here's the buffet of options for load generation, NoSQL Bench being one of them, or do we feel like there is, one tool to rule them all? And oftentimes in software engineering, what you find is that in some domains there's the 80-20, where 80% of use cases can be solved by like the 20% rule that you implement, but a lot of the important value comes from that kind of point of view, the opinion, the codification of what it is you're actually trying to target and do a kind of a bespoke implementation for. So anyway, long-winded answer to your question about NoSQL Bench, but it's actually a pretty interesting thing we've seen happening in the Cassandra ecosystem in the last year or two.
Yeah, definitely. By the way, if you are curious how DataStax tests for DataStax Enterprise and Apache Cassandra, we DevRel team recently released 2 workshops for Fallout and NoSQL Bench. So it's all now available at our channel. You are going to watch these video mostly probably, so like you can get much deeper into how it goes. Okay, thanks, Josh. It's very interesting. Now I want to proceed with the next one. There is really a lot of people working at the Cassandra version 4 and a lot of companies. Whom you would mention first? Which people are the most important from your point of view? Which companies made the biggest impact to a version 4?
Yeah, I would. You're going to trigger me with that word "important." There's contribution by volume, and one of the things that we always struggle with is, like, not all lines of code are created equally, not all commits are created equally. So every engineer that I ever talk to, and I've managed engineers for quite some time, they always rail against this whole, like, you can't judge a book by its cover when it comes to these metrics. However, when there is a preponderance of evidence and things, if you look at the GitHub insights for the Cassandra project, it's pretty obvious that Apple has had a really huge hand in helping improve the project over the course of the last few years. They've done bunch of incredible work. They're all incredible engineers, and it's public knowledge that they're running a boatload of Cassandra internally on their infrastructure. It's very important to them strategically as a business. We've also seen some pretty cool work by the guys that were running Roxandra over at Instagram.
Yep.
Yep, and you've got Vinay and Joey that have done a bunch of great work. Netflix has been pretty present in there, and obviously DataStax has been present as well as contributors. But what you see is that there's a lot of really big, really successful companies that have essentially bet some of their strategic success on this software as an infrastructural, like a core critical infrastructural component of what they're working on. One of the things that's been most enlightening to me within actually about the last 6 to 8 months is just finding out how much more Cassandra there is in the world than I knew, than I realized, and finding out about other users, other enterprises that are running 60, 70, 80,000 nodes of Cassandra that aren't actually on the project itself as well. So it's been interesting to try to reconcile these two things, where you have a lot of really big, heavy-hitting players that are incredibly successful, incredibly technically skilled companies that are kind of at the forefront and cutting edge of tech, and seeing that, bringing the power of the gods and the power of fire down to other companies and other mortals. And that's kind of been the cycle of Cassandra. But yeah, 4.0 has seen much more of a community upswelling in terms of the contribution to it and the driving of its direction than any release in the past has seen.
Okay, yes, that's I've heard Apple mostly uses version 2. I don't know if it's correct or wrong, but at least that was said like 1 or 2 years ago. So I'm curious, are they going to migrate directly to version 4 from version 2, or something is going undercover, what we don't know?
I can't speak to any of the internals of what they're running unless they've chosen to make that stuff public. But they are, as we all know, they are definitely running a lot of Cassandra, and different versions of Cassandra have different trade-offs in terms of what they optimize for. And one of the things that we also see is that the migration from being a Thrift-based storage engine, for those that don't know, Thrift is a super, super flexible, no schema, but also kind of difficult to control with proliferation of things. Moving from a Thrift-based storage engine to a CQL-based storage engine and codifying that API means that for enterprises or for users that have adopted a lot of older Cassandra and built their applications on Thrift, there's a disincentive to moving forward because it involves a rewriting to a new API. And so there's, we see that there's a lot of Cassandra out in the world running across a lot of different versions. Actually, I think a few years ago, there was a really interesting talk about, I think it was at Instagram with Francois and his team, running a proxy that was translating Thrift into CQL. So it's been interesting to see how, being an open source ecosystem, there's a lot of different opinions that can be expressed about the APIs themselves, about the storage engine in the back end, and kind of drive adoption in that way.
Okay. I know what you was one of the people making some project management support to make this release real.
Yeah.
And well, I kind of understand how this kind of work works in the regular company, like regular product company doing regular job. That's, I believe, everyone understands how it works. But how it looks to work with an Apache product, well, not product maybe, but Apache Foundation project. Yeah. And what was your personal involvement into the version 4 by itself?
Yeah, well, it's always interesting, and it leans on personal relationships instead of hierarchical influence, which basically means like I'm talking to John Haddad every week or every other week. I'm keeping in touch with Dinesh, and I'm keeping in touch with Vinay and Joey, and I'm talking to Jay, and like all of us kind of have to stay in contact to kind of know like where each other's heads are at and what we're working on. I'm talking to Alexi and Benedict, talking to Jordan, John. Like it essentially ends up being this giant like social network of soft power is one way to put it. And Jordan and John are working on project management as well. But at the end of the day, nobody's telling anybody else what to do. And everybody has other priorities and other things going on in their life. Not to mention that, there's other things going on in the world today as well that may be taking people's attention away from working on an open source project. Global pandemic, lockdown, et cetera. So essentially what it translates into is me personally trying to walk this very fine line of helping make sure things don't slip through the cracks without being obnoxious, right? Like my goal is not to pressure anybody, but just to make sure that, hey, if a Katarina has a ticket that needs a reviewer, and I know that Joey's expressed interest in it, but it's been a week and a half, like, is it still on his radar? Should we grab somebody else? If Benjamin is stalling on something, check with him to see whether or not like he needs any help. And it really, like, it is an honest expression of, I kind of get to have a foot in these two different worlds where my mandate, my priority, the reason I get up in the morning, the reason I exist, my role at DataStax is drive adoption of Apache Cassandra, make it the best NoSQL database in the world. And thankfully, I also have resources that I have the ability to kind of help direct towards that end. But ultimately, that is the goal. So project management in 4.0 ends up being a lot less about dictating what people are doing and a lot more about trying to help shape attention in the event that people are multiplexing and something's fallen off a radar. And time and again, I have discovered that we all have so much going on that things like that do slip through the cracks. So it kind of requires this consistent drumbeat of just making sure we all on the same page. Anybody need any help with anything? Stuff like that. So that's what that looks like. And Jordan and John are doing the exact same thing. We're sending out aspirational weekly, but it really turns into more like bi-weekly updates about, here's the status of the project. We've got this Jira board that shows where all the tickets are. We kind of have different quick filters to show, hey, here's tickets that nobody's moved in the last couple of weeks. Maybe somebody wants to take a look at that. Here's things that don't have an assignee. So basically just that, like shaping attention and helping kind of guide people towards, the things that may be of value to the project as a whole to work on.
Yep. Okay. So feature freeze for the Cassandra version 4 was announced, I believe, in somewhere in autumn 2018.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. And the question is like how we as a community decide and how do we build a consensus about what should go into the version 4 and what should wait. So, for example, this pluggable storage engine for Roxandra Instagram things were obviously not ready to go live in 4 version 0. It was just not finished yet. Very interesting upgrade by itself, but okay, it was just not ready. But how do we decide what fits and what doesn't?
This is a super timely question. Yesterday morning out to the dev list, I sent out an email with a draft for kind of codifying how we do governance as a project. And this doesn't come from me, right? Like the PMC has been talking about this, and Benedict spent a huge amount of time and energy and effort to kind of help shape this conversation. We don't really have a precedent for saying, here's our muscle for doing this thing. And so for 4.0, it was kind of a, not really random walk, but we're all like, okay, we've got a lot of meat in this release. We want to stabilize it. We've got enough features that are inside it. So let's go ahead and say, here's the date where we're going to draw a line in the sand, and then we'll stabilize from there. My personal point of view on this, and I've spoken with some other people in the project, and there's some interest in this and sympathy towards this perspective, is that we start using the CEP process. That's the Cassandra enhancement proposals, and really have like a collection of things where we say, okay, for the next release, we think this is its identity, and here's the features that we think we want to get in there. I personally, and again, like there's no single decision maker on a project like this, I personally would advocate for us also having a point of view about a calendar date. So if things take longer than we expect they do, which they always take longer than we expect they do, it's true of software engineering in general, but certainly true on this project. We say like, here's our cutoff date, right? Like let's aspire for majors every 6 months, or aspire for majors every 12 months, or whatever it may be. So have a point of view about what we think the identity of release should be. Right. So when somebody looks for a compelling narrative for why does Cassandra 4.0 exist? Why does Cassandra 5.0 exist? They have a really solid gut check feel for, this is why this thing is here and why I should care. But also have some guardrails on that so things don't stretch too long. And one of the things that we found on this project, and we've taken a lot of different approaches to try to figure out how to tackle this, is that when releases happen infrequently, there's an immense amount of pressure to try to get something in before release is cut, which ends up implicitly pressuring that date to slip. And there was an attempt to try to get to where we had releasable masters, super stabilized, release much more frequently, which was great for developer velocity, but not necessarily great for stabilization of the code base. So we're going to have to figure out how to strike this balance to have be mindful and cognizant that this is complex infrastructure software that takes some time to bake and to stabilize, but also have releases more frequently than we have been in the 4.0 era.
Mm-hmm. I say, yeah, that's interesting. Do you think it may go on the way like it's done with Ubuntu release approach, like we release something every 6 months or every year, like on this cadence, define it?
It may go that way. I mean, I would advocate for that. I certainly can't in the future. I've talked to some other people in the project, and 6 months is not outlandish for releasing another major in terms of the cadence with which we do it. But what has to come first is the discipline around testing, the discipline around quality, the automation around diff testing of different user workloads. I floated the idea of people being able to submit anonymized schemas that we then use Fallout to do like generative fuzz testing against your schema. And like that, I think there'd be some value in people being able to say, I've uploaded my schema and I've seen that it's run against the new release and I know it's fine in a mixed version cluster and in the new update. So there's ideas that we're bandying around with how do we use kind of modern CI/CD principles and disciplines to get to where it's safer for us to release infrastructure software on a faster cadence. Kind of open Pandora's box with modern application development and modern infrastructure development paradigms and the Cassandra architecture. But that's a different topic than the 4.0 topic, so we can talk about that later.
Yeah, definitely. It's a big topic, and I will be really happy to discuss some more topics later on. Okay, so now the latest release of Cassandra version 4, I mean alpha release, is Alpha 4. It went live like in the end of April somehow, I believe. So Alpha 4 sounds already much better, but still not enough. Sorry. How do you think? When do we know we are ready to go to at least with beta release?
Yeah, on the wiki we actually have a pretty well codified set of points of view on what our release life cycle is, and so that kind of says what guarantees can a user expect or not expect from a release. And in beta, there's the expectation that you can basically run this thing. It's going to be API stable. You won't expect the CQL semantics to change. You won't expect the public APIs in the code base to change. And the part that there's fluidity around is what is or isn't going to interfere with somebody's ability to actually test the code base. Like if you're a user and we say beta's ready, break this thing. We don't want to have like a laundry list of known issues 15 miles long where every single time you find a defect, you got to go check it. So right now we're at a point to where we're, I believe, 5 tickets away as of this morning from a beta release. So we're pretty close at this point. We've been floating in this kind of like 6 to 12 range off and on for it seems like about a month now. The reality of that when you look behind the scenes is since this is the first like really community-led release, we're kind of having to figure out what this muscle looks like. We're having to figure out what are the different cutoff points for different milestones for the release and what's going to go where and what do we do with flaky tests and what do we do with X, Y, and Z. So we're figuring these things out and codifying those behaviors. So subsequent releases should be a lot smoother and happen a lot more rapidly in terms of like knowing when it's going to happen. But yeah, for now we're pretty dang close to the beta, and I've kind of taken it upon myself to do what I'm thinking of as like a daily drumbeat. Go through every single ticket, make sure that nothing is stalling, reach out to the individuals that are working on it and make sure that if anybody can help with anything or they need any external input or any kind of resource support, they're getting it. But yeah, that's kind of where things are.
I see. Okay, so Apache Foundation, that's always about the community. And my question is, how do you feel like working with a community, being a part of a community for so many years? How do you feel the community changed in these years, and how does the community collaboration change within last years?
My personal opinion, I'm going to try to be diplomatic, is that the Cassandra community in many ways has been insular. We have not we've not expanded out a lot, and a lot of that, like, everybody's a rational actor, and this comes from all the right places with the right intent, is that this is like crucial infrastructure software that the world runs on. Like this is the backbone of a lot of like core stuff that all of us interact with literally every day. And so there's an immense feeling of responsibility to make sure that the bar of quality remains as high as we can possibly keep it. And what that's translated into is, like, when I think back to me being introduced to the project, 6.5 years ago, like to test whether or not I could come into this ecosystem was like, here's a ticket no one's been able to solve, chew on it for a while. And like, that's a really high bar to figure out. Like, if no one else can figure it out, can this new guy figure it out? So we've long had discussions about how do we make this a community that has a lower barrier to entry, where we can identify areas in the code base where we don't consider them like, you know, third rail hot button, if you touch this you can bring things down kind of territory, and figure out a different path to, you know, inclusivity and ramping on the ecosystem and the project itself. There's a lot of really good discussion going on with that. There's diversity and inclusivity initiatives going on with the Apache Foundation itself. This is something that in general people are realizing, that if you leave things to their own implicit evolution, you don't really get the outcomes you want in terms of a diversity of perspectives on your project. And so this is something that I've got a lot of thoughts about, I've got points of view about, and we're kind of starting these discussions as a project. And this topic came up even a couple of weeks ago as well, with somebody from the board. All positive things. Everybody's open-minded about this and just trying to explore with curiosity, what are the right next steps for us as a project to consider. A couple of things that I expect us to see relatively soon is that DataStax has come forward and has offered the drivers as a donation and a contribution to the project, and has offered the DataStax documentation as a contribution to the project as well. Both of those projects have a different set of expectations and a different set of entry points in terms of people's ability to get involved collaborating on those things. And so I think between initiatives around like identifying low-hanging fruit, between initiatives that are very nascent around modularizing the code base and actually cleaning up some things and making it so you can come in and work on something without having to understand everything, and around having people be able to get involved with the driver ecosystem, I think there's a lot of kind of change on the very, very near horizon in terms of what that project community looks like and its diversification. But that's kind of like some of the thoughts rattling around in my head on that topic.
Yeah, I see. Okay, we are almost out of time, so I have time for only one last question. So you work not only with Cassandra, of course, but with many different products and projects and so on. And my last question would be like, how do you think what the best things would be for the Apache Cassandra and Apache Cassandra community to borrow and to learn from in other projects, but also what would other projects learn for good from Apache Cassandra project and the community by itself?
Yeah, so in terms of what the Cassandra project can learn from other projects, I've been looking to other Apache projects to kind of see how they run things, how they work, anything as they do that the Cassandra project doesn't yet have. And one of the things that stuck out to me the most is widening the kind of inclusivity of what we consider contributions outside of just code. And even outside of the ecosystem of, you know, tooling and other software around the core of the project itself. And one of the things that was most surprising to me and eye-opening and obvious in retrospect is this notion of having people that are in marketing or in sales actually dedicate and contribute their time and their expertise to the Cassandra project itself, and to help drive adoption, help drive awareness, things of that nature. So that's something that, you know, I've definitely picked up and learned from some of the external projects, specifically, you know, Databricks and their relationship with Spark was what kind of opened my eyes on that topic.
You know, I'm not surprised that most of the engineers use it to consider projects only from engineering point of view. But we should not forget that's not only about engineering, that's about all the systems, ecosystems, all the things, what making Cassandra what it is by itself. Any product, not only Cassandra.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the one big thing, and maybe this is, you know, hubris on my part, but the one big thing I think the rest of at least the Apache ecosystem may be able to benefit from with the Cassandra project is that we have a little bit of appetite to try to figure out like the minimum viable codification of what the Apache way is. A lot of times there's these discussions about it's really hard to understand the Apache way. It's really hard to understand community over code. It's really hard to understand like what the PMC's role is, what committer's role is. And I mean, if we manage to codify this in a way that makes sense, that has like the guiding philosophies of like, here's the bare bones of like the PMC's role and the powers in the hands of the committers, and the committers are the ones that actually shape where things go. And like, if we can get to a point to where we have a precedent or a muscle where we can codify as a project what we do in a way that's digestible and lightweight, mean, right now the governance doc is 2 pages, right? Like we've really made it a point to try to keep this thing terse. That could be valuable to other projects, and just in general, having some kind of precedent for lightweight governance. Like these are things that could apply beyond just the Apache Foundation, since the CNCF isn't particularly prescriptive in how projects govern themselves. So there may be something there that we could help share with others.
Okay, yes, that's one of the biggest projects in the world, I would say. We definitely can learn something from ours, but also learn a lot, teach a lot to ours. And what I want to say in the very end. So first of all, Josh, thank you for being with us, answering questions. It was a very interesting communication upon all the things happening with the Cassandra version 4. It was a long way. This year it's going to be done, I bet. And the very last question, like, come on, everyone is asking it. When?
Yeah, the non-answer that I give people, it's like when you're running a proprietary software team, it's almost impossible to give a date. And when you're working on an open source project, like take that and make it 2 orders of magnitude worse. I'm pretty comfortable saying like in this calendar year we will have a 4.0. And given that we are 5 tickets away from a beta and 36 tickets in beta away from GA, I don't think it's going to be December 31st. I would aspirationally say at sometime in the fall of this year, we'll have a 4.0 GA hit. And a lot of that is going to be up to a lot of people working really, really hard and, volunteering their time and their heartbeats and their energy to really engage with this process, which is a huge thing, and what makes open source really different than a lot of other tribes that you can associate with.
Okay, so final word. There is a lot of people watching us who are Cassandra users. What would you say to tell to them to make Cassandra happen sooner and faster?
Engage with this testing. Like as soon as that beta is cut, or even now, because like we're only 5 tickets away from beta, it's not going to be that different than where we are now. Get this thing installed, kick the tires, try it out, test it out. And if you're a software engineer and you want to start getting involved with the project, absolutely come on. Like hop on Jira, hop onto the ASF Slack for the Cassandra dev channel, ask how you can help out. There's a bunch of people that are super excited and interested in like onboarding and mentoring new people onto the project. There has never been a better time to get involved with things. And so that's what I would say is if you want to see the release sooner, get involved and let's get it here sooner together.
And even if you are maybe not ready right now to engage into the development, you always can find a warm place in the field of documentation, I bet.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. So that was Josh McKenzie and Aleks Volochnev from DataStax, and see you next time.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to the Distributed Data Show. Please subscribe with your favorite podcast app, give us a rating.